You.
Roger, you'll meet.
Who the fuck are you?
You know who I am.
What do you want from me? Why are you here? And where is here?
Want anything from you? I want only the best from your show.
And you do so by watching my every move like a creepy stalker dude?
Is that really so different to you are doing? I thought I am simply doing what you are doing, trying to improve your little show.
What do you mean?
Giving you all the prompts to improve your show this season, haven't I? I've made you get all these guest stars to join your show. But I didn't want to see the count box. Videos that get far more views than your normal videos. Make you include your scenes from the previous season. Cause people wanted them so bad.
Yeah, and now they're gone and I can't seem to summon them again.
Cause I removed them. It was time to change things up again.
You can't just change stuff like that.
It's making your show better, isn't it? I mean, that is what you reviewers do, isn't it? You analyze down to its smallest detail and then tell people how to improve it.
But that's just what you want, what you think is for the better. Do you have any idea the amount of bullshit I've been through because of you?
It's not that far on the receiving end of the gun, is it? People do this. You are so busy pointing the gun outwards, firing shots at whatever you find happens when you point the gun towards yourself. We start seeing you for who you really are. See your sins. We see your scars. We see you enjoying to complain, rather than compliment. Why you still bother to read those letters, and have nothing to be proud of yourself.
I assume you're making a point?
Made you. We made you. We made this show to finish off this season. What better way to end it than with a tragedy?
What are you talking about?
Talking about that.
No, come on, man. I looked up to this guy. He's the reason why I started this show in the first place.
It's such a good role model. Then surely you won't find anything wrong with his comic, will you? No. Time to take that gun you love to wave around so much, and point it at the head of your hero.
Let's reverse time. Let's go all the way back to my very first video. This clusterfuck right here. It feels like yesterday, but it's actually been 8 years since I made this. Back then I made these videos with the attempt on getting on the, at the time, famous review site called That Guy with the Glasses. I was very open with this and even proudly waved the flag of having 3 different idols that inspired me on how to make the show and why. One was the spoony one, Noah Antweiler. It was even because of him that I had the cover blood scene in my last season, cause Les Linders was referencing one of my inspiration's jokes. Spoony, however, well, he hasn't been doing anything good for the past many years, failed to deliver on any and all of his Patreon stretch goals several years after the fact, and seems to be treating his fanbase like dirt.
When will you see results? That's the tricky thing. I don't know.
Okay. Next on the list was the Nostalgia Critic, Dog Walker, the forerunner for the site I was trying to get on. Doug is, or maybe rather was, up there with the biggest names in the online reviewer business. I say was, cause as of late he has come under heavy scrutiny because the site he was hosting proved to be less than ideal working place, and Doug unfortunately didn't seem to know his nuts from his elbows when it came to managing the site, even less so did the people working with him.
And recently, myself and about 20 other producers from the site put together a Google document talking about our experiences there, which were largely really negative, and I'll get into that in a little bit.
In case you can't tell, this is me taking my hopes of working with some of my big idols and...
One of the forerunners of exposing the working conditions at that guy with the glasses is the third and last of my inspirations. The guy who I keep having my reviews compared to, and yes, I know he covered Diesel better than I did. The guy who I actually emailed when I got started and got a sincere reply back from with tips and tools I could use to improve my show, and is the reason why I today use PhotoStory to edit my picture animations. I'm talking about none other than... Lewis Lohawk, aka Linkara, one of the biggest online comic reviewers on the internet. When I still followed this guy, I don't think there was a single moment where I wasn't having his videos running while I was playing video games, and when one episode ended, it was on to the next, even if I had absolutely no interest in Superman or Batman. Linkara simply, to me, managed to make coverage about something that I had no interest in whatsoever be fun and entertaining. And I don't think it's particularly secret that I tried to mirror his behavior and jokes in my own show when I first got started. I eventually stopped watching his videos, but I still respected what he did. So imagine my surprise when I found out one of the guys who got me started on reviewing webcomics actually had a webcomic of his own, Lightbringer. And trust me, I've known this for like 7 to 8 years now, and I have also read it, and... Well, let's just say half the reason I haven't covered the comic until now was out of respect for Lewis. Cause it's not very good.
I hear you, person in the comments. There is indeed 2 elephants in the room that we need to body tackle before we can continue this review. This might take some time, but please bear with me.
In June 2017, the content creator Mr. Medica put out a video about Linkara. Prior to this, Medica had done 2 other videos on that guy with the glasses, dissecting the fall of some of its more prominent content creators, in what could sometimes feel like a sad acknowledgement of their rise and fall. In this video, Medica showed proof and evidence of Linkara under a different pseudonym signing up and taking part of various porn fetish forums. I'm not gonna go into every little detail, cause honestly that's not what this video is about, but if you're interested you can watch the video yourself. The reason we need to address this is because Lewis has always been a forerunner for doing the right thing, treating people with respect, and so on and so forth.
I'm only really bringing this up because it's the first elephant that decided to call the other elephant and invite it into the room as well.
We are obviously gonna have to talk about the Lightbringer stream that I did, that is now unlisted from my channel as the one and only video I've ever found it necessary to do so to. The reason for this is while the majority of the stream was spent on going through the comic, because it was so entangled with Linkara and the information that had just come out about him, a lot of the criticism ended up being about him and not the comic, and it feels like not everyone were on the same page as to what it was we were supposed to address. This made the stream more of a mocking circle jerk where we shat on Linkara rather than his work, and I made it very clear since then that that's not what the webcomic relief is about.
So why am I reviewing this comic after this massive shit show?
Well, the comic is still a webcomic out there, and even if it was done by someone who I used to have a ton of respect for, that shouldn't exclude it from criticism. Just because you look up to someone doesn't mean you have to agree with everything they say or do, that they are above criticism and all that stuff. I also think that it's bound to be interesting to see what such a big star reviewer who's known for hitting down on character inconsistencies, plot holes and bad art would produce himself. I mean, if he's so good at pointing errors out, surely he wouldn't do those mistakes himself, would he?
You're not the smartest. Life out, you're not an artist. Anyone who's had a bad comic published, it could be your turn.
So this comes from a guy who used to idolize Linkara, who only has a show today and all these lovely subscribers because of his inspiration. With the utmost respect, it's time for me to finally review this comic and outgrow my hero for good.
I'm looking for plot holes. I'm looking for bizarre character motivations. I'm looking for terrible artwork. I'm looking for the bland, the bizarre, the ludicrous, the lazy, the insipid, the surreal.
Then why does your comic suffer from this too?
Meet self-insert Carter Granholm, a young man living in the made-up city Pharaoh City. A city that has become overrun with crime by various gangs such as the Slavers, a group of thugs specializing in human trafficking and prostitution. With a name like that, I'm as shocked as you are. Carter is, however, not your typical young man who works in a furniture shop. Oh no! He has the power to control light. He has, however, not used his powers because his parents were strong believers of pacifism. And since they died, Carter's been living his life strictly following their teachings and beliefs. It's not until one day where he sees a young girl about to get raped in an alley that he decides to cast his parents' teachings aside and take up his alter ego, Lightbringer.
And before you think he cast these teachings aside so he can save the rape victim, oh no, he just runs home and doesn't even call the police. What the fuck?
Yeah, that makes sense.
After his transformation, Carter uses his inspiration from comic books that he wasn't allowed to read as a kid as a guideline for how to use his powers, which is of course by donning a costume and fighting crime. I get him using his power to shoot out light and burn people, but how does light powers give him the physical strength to beat people up to the point of breaking their bones, which Carter claims is not a serious injury? And his costume is just odd to me. I get he's using parts from old furniture as that's what he has available, but the way he paints his hair is with, and I shit you not, furniture touch-up paint.
I could read to you all the different components that is in this, but I think I will rather read this little tidbit here. May cause cancer, genetic defects, cause damage to organs through prolonged or repeated exposure, may cause an allergic skin reaction, and is incredibly flammable. This shit is so bad for your hair you would think that I had used it.
So Carter decides he wants to do the superhero thing and fight crime and leaves a note for the commissioner because Batman. The commissioner is however at an impasse, not knowing whether to side with Carter or to bring him in, as the act of vigilante work is still a crime. So what does he do? He, more or less, hires Lightbringer as a hitman to take down a gang known as the Slayers. And no, these names don't get much more creative than this. So much for not knowing which side of the fence he's on. This further leads to Lightbringer being freaking hired by the FBI, because apparently Lightbringer works outside of the law. No, he doesn't. It's actively your job to enforce it. And then there's this. Dedicated to everyone who believes that good and evil aren't subjective.
This is so Panson had retarded, unlike a Tumble Girl where I can't even.
Let me break it down why this is retarded, and I'm gonna use this comic's mindset just to prove a point. In this comic, the act of doing violence is evil. However, doing violence to those who deserve it is good. Someone, somewhere, decided whether or not the person getting beat up deserved it. That's subjective. Congratulations, fucko, your dedication is faulty at best, childish at worst. Honestly, that's one of the key words that drives the writing of this comic. Childish. And I know, it's fine, it's fair, Lewis was young when he wrote this, but this is still the same dude who carries himself in the text underneath the comic and even in the writing itself with such a bravado that I'm forced to say that bravado is based on next to nothing.
Here's a list of things you shouldn't include in your comic if you don't want it to read like it was written by a 6-year-old.
1. Don't try and write the other sex like you understand them in any sort of capacity when all your knowledge about them appears to come from movies, books and other forms of fiction. When Lewis writes girls in his story, for example, they are reduced to beings only talking about boys, shopping and how to look better to steal their gaze from men. Furthermore, he only puts them in roles where they are victims, and then when he wishes to escape this trope, he goes so far off the rails in the other end that women are able to lift objects twice their weight above their head with little to no effort, or being the perfect girlfriend who's super into exact the same thing as Carter, to the point where she's exploding with hype over the chance to work in a freaking furniture shop.
Number 2.
Don't put yourself in your goddamn comic. We've been over this before, it's just not a good look. It's fine to use yourself as a reference point, but the reference point kinda has to stop somewhere. And that shouldn't be where you do number 3, which is what we will be covering soon, just straight up stealing material from pre-established superheroes and using them on your own character. So you either get a character based on Lewis, and I know this cause just like Medina from Suicide for Hire, every time Carter says something, Lewis is right there in the description agreeing with himself or explaining how something relates to himself, or you got what is essentially just a watered down version of pre-established well-known superheroes such as Batman or Green Lantern. The problem with this is that while these comics exist in Lightbringer's universe, even by name, no one goes, "Wow Carter, your backstory sure sounds a lot like Batman's backstory, complete with your parents being killed in a murder alley by an unknown uncaught criminal." Or, "Geez Louise Lightbringer, your powers are awfully similar to Green Lantern's, aren't they?" Or even, "Wow, you just straight up quoted fucking Rorschach from The Watchmen, didn't you?" They do refer to Carter as Batman at one point, but that does little to justify just how much this comic is just an amalgamation of stolen ideas from different superhero comics.
The worst part is that this could actually be super interesting if it had actually been addressed. Like, oh, I'm going to use this from Batman, and this inspiration from Superman, and I'm going to do this because of Iron Man. Like, you could use so many different components and show this as a person who has been affected by different superheroes and what good superheroes can do to a child who's going through struggles. But nope, you threw that in the trash because now we only have to focus on Lightbringer, and you didn't want people to kind of catch on to the fact that Lightbringer is just a shitty Green Lantern ripoff.
Number 4. Don't force your ideologies onto others, least of all your audience, and cram these ideologies down their throats. Not only does Lewis do this through himself, but he'll also use Carter as a mouthpiece and the comic as a soapbox to speak from, and he does so very much like you will see Christian do it, with its derailing the entire plot just so Carter can spout his ideals. It gets incredibly tiring and insanely frustrating whenever you're reading this comic to sometimes just having to pause, cause now it's time for Lewis to spout some knowledge about the world to you and force his thoughts and ideals down your throat even if you don't agree with them, and even sometimes in the description outright calling you out for not agreeing with him. Number 5. Don't put yourself in your goddamn comic again. So you got Carter, who is obviously Lewis, but he is somehow not the only self-insert in the comic. There is another character in the comic that is based on Lewis. I mean, fuck's sake, his name is Lewis, just spelled differently. He, like Carter, has a huge hard-on for comic books, and he has the fucking superhero named Linkara. Like, fuck off, why don't you? Not even Christian or Disney fan were this bad. It's freaking embarrassing. How much of an ego must you have to put yourself in a comic twice?
No wonder Lewis didn't want to review Sonichu. I mean, this comic is basically just that.
It really is. A comic that looks like it's been drawn by a child with the grandiose thoughts that their comic is the biggest best thing since sliced bread, that they are ready to lie to their audience. Don't worry, we'll get into that later. A comic that will completely detract from the actual plot just to go on a tangent as a mouthpiece from the creator. A comic that has clear, obvious self-inserts with close ties to the creator's real life. The only difference here is that there's not a fucking chapter dedicated to the Lightbringer's sex life. The comic isn't as offensive as Sonichu, but it sure has the same feel, and it's just uncomfortable to read. Half of the reason why it took me so long to make this review is because I constantly found myself talking about Lewis, cause this comic and Lewis himself are so tightly woven together that it's near impossible to separate the two. Like, I feel bad that people online can readily read this, much like I got it with my earlier videos.
I feel I got off track for a moment there.
As bad as this comic is, and boy is it bad, there is a certain awkward charm about it. This is gonna sound like I'm calling Lewis a child, and maybe I kinda am, but it kinda feels like an awkward bumbling kid making a love letter to superhero comics. Lightbringer follows the formula of many Western comics down to a T, so much so it's bordering on stealing ideas, concepts, power characters and themes. It's just a guy who really loves comics and wanted to make his own, and that's a really cute and noble idea, and really, had it not been because Lewis is who he is and is such a big name online, no one would have cared about this comic. It's just unfortunate that the one superhero comic that people decided to look at in this case is one that completely derails a lot of the time. It's an innocent, childish superhero comic made by a superhero comic fan. It just happens to be a bad one at that.
There's something to be said here about it being easier to criticize something than it is to make something.
At its core, Lightbringer doesn't really offer anything new. It doesn't change anything and it doesn't set new standards. Well, maybe for how many self-inserts you can get in your own comic, but whatever. It's a comic made by a child or an immature person trying so hard to act more mature than they really are, and the writing of the comic deeply reflects that. It is a superhero comic, but the confrontations between the hero and the villains hardly ever seem to be the focal point, and even then they're horribly predictable and downright silly. Lewis understands very little of agency and conveyance, so much so that he has a plot-vital time machine thingy that is introduced as a breast enhancement device and straight up has instructions attached to it where it says that breaking the space-time continuum is a side effect as a joke.
I am not making this up.
So, you might be wondering why I've only talked about Lewis when talking about the creation of this comic, and not Ted Sage, who is the first artist behind Lightbringer. Well, the answer might shock you. It sure shocked me, but then I realized no one in their right mind would hire an artist this god-awful. Ted Sage simply doesn't exist. And I'm not just saying that because googling Ted Sage will only get you hits on Express Oil Change, no. If you go to the FAQ of Lightbringer, you will find the revelation that Ted Sage isn't real. He's a pseudonym Lewis used for the sake of having more people associated with the comic to make it look more real. And while we're at it, Fred Goldart isn't real either.
Lewis, this is shit you would make fun of in your own videos, for fuck's sake.
Right off the bat, let me just address one thing. Lewis knows his art sucks. And good, cause boy howdy does it suck. Once again, I'm prone to compare it to Sonichu, most of all cause it shows a clear disinterest in making anything anatomically correct or proportionally correct. This means you'll find limbs bending in ways they shouldn't be able to, people at the same size of chairs, and sometimes just be horribly confused with what's going on. Like, fuck's sake, the moment Carter puts on his mask, his forehead and eye size change. Like he even does it when he's doing a side-by-side comparison. How do you not see the flaw yourself?
You can pinpoint the exact frame in a ton of different comics where it appears that a guy is swinging and hitting a guy in the face with his stick. But you cannot tell when it looks like you're actively breaking the bones in a guy's skull.
Look, what do you want from me? This comic is ass looking and I'm pretty sure most of it is drawn with paint. The art does, however, very much like the writing, come from a place of love, and it's cute and all. But that doesn't mean it doesn't look terrible, and it doesn't mean that it was a good idea to make an action comic when you're this bad at drawing. Actions are incredibly hard to draw, and when making an action superhero comic, you have to make those actions incredibly often. You need to understand weight, momentum, kinetic movement, kinetic linking, and at least have a somewhat basic understanding of how fighting works. So, to the aspiring comic creators out there, that means having your arm out and running at the opponent like it was a fucking lance is not gonna work. Every time there's any sort of fight, it looks like the fight from Star Trek. Manga and anime has a stigma of being too exaggerated. When someone is shocked, they don't just get big eyes. No, the eyes will typically shoot out, breaking glasses if the person in question is wearing them. But exaggerated as they may be, few things manages to show actions as well as manga. I mean, look at Berserk for example. Every single time Guts swing his sword, you can almost feel the turbulence coming after it. It feels like a slab of iron being swung rather than an agile fast sword. Or look at Goku firing off a Kamehameha. Notice his arm first and foremost. They are bent as if the force from shooting the beam is pushing his arms backwards. His torso is bending backwards, his left leg is pushed down and his right leg is placed behind him as a way to steady himself. Despite the energy shooting out of him, you get the feeling that it's pushing him back, and because of this, you get a sense of the power of the beam. It's an explosion rather than just a light show. Western comics are often more hit and miss with this, I find. I mean, look at this picture here of Spider-Man punching Storm. This doesn't look like it actually hurt, does it? It kinda looks like a weak, simple jab, like he's just casually poking her chin with his knuckles. You get no sense of movement, no torque, no power. But when you see this here where Spidey is punching Osborn and kablamso, look at that! Someone's getting punched and they're getting punched hard. Why the difference? First and foremost because of the obvious, the spittle or whatever it is. Again, there's an explosion. Not a typical fire explosion, but one of force and water. And if you trail the water and their trajectory, you see them all coming from the point of impact, Osborn's mouth. You can also look at Spider-Man's pose. Even though there's no speed lines or even an impact spark or even an onomatopoeia, you get the feeling that Spider-Man just punched the shit out of Osborn because of his pose. His hitting arm is outstretched, but still curved a little, implying a hook. His body is twisted in the same direction as the punch, moving the body along with the punch. This is what's called kinetic linking, where you use your entire body to do an attack. His left hand is even hidden away behind his body, showing his entire upper body screwed along with the punch. Now why do I bring this up? Well, with the information in the back of our mind, look at Lightbringer's art. It all feels weak, boring, uneventful, stale, and slow. I've had farts with more impact than these hits. Be it punches, kicks, stabs, beams, swings, flight, acrobatics, or even basic movement, you never get the feeling that there's any speed behind anything. And when you're making a comic with actions in it, you might want to be sure you get that stuff down to a science.
But Riser, he was just a kid. He didn't know how to draw back then. Yes, but he wants his comic to be a big boy comic, so he needs to put on his big boy pants.
Lewis does eventually end up handing over the reins to two other artists. First Chad Rocco, and then later Sergio J.A. Ragno. Chad's art did a lot for Lightbringer in terms of giving it a personal flair and actually making it look like an actual comic. It's dynamic, colorful, simple, kinda reminiscent of a colorful version of the Batman the Animated Series, and just, you know, all around good to look at. Things are conveyed better, different angles are tried and explored, and information is just better shown rather than told. Chad's art is first introduced in issue 13, however, and just to put it into context, there's only 15 issues available. Sergio was first introduced in the middle of issue 15, or well, I say introduced, but truth is the comic went on a year-long hiatus at one point, and when it came back, Sergio was now the artist, and the only introductions we got to Sergio with just a casual half-assed name drop in the middle of one of those page descriptions where Lewis talks about how the page was originally gonna look. Putting it into context, when Rocco was brought on board, he got a full description under the page dedicated to him as well as a link to his DeviantArt account. The reason I point this out is because maybe Lewis appreciated Rocco more, and if so, I can understand that. Don't get me wrong, Sergio is a great artist in his own right, but I personally feel Rocco was a better fit. Things were very reminiscent of what Lewis's art style had grown into at that point in time, while still having its own unique look that fit with the play of lights that the comic had started using. And then comes Sergio, and you know, it looks fine if not pretty cartoony, but it's just not as good. The line thickness deviates and not when it should. Things in the distance has the same line thickness as what is in the forefront. Everything has this jagged and crude look, and his word bubbles and boxes are just incredibly amateur hour. Half the time the line from the bubbles will cut into the words, and when that's not the case, the bubbles are either still so close to the words that it becomes a problem to discern the letters from the bubble, or the words are given so much space that you start to think if words were cut out.
I still very much like Sergio's art. His use of light and shadows is great, and I really like his art style because it's very cartoony. So I definitely think you should go check out his comic at 13thchild.net.
Lewis's art does change and improve as it grows more confident, and as much as I have shat on this comic and its art thus far, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't genuinely enjoying seeing Lewis improving, and yo, when I say he improves, he improves. Things starts getting presented better, he takes more chances, the poses become more dynamic, albeit still pretty stiff, and he starts using different angles to emphasize a point. The colors are still way too saturated, his shadows are just weird and ugly, and even with his new art style, his faces all look the same. I mean, look at this. Look how all of these faces look the same. Sure, some has round jaws and some has unreasonably square jaws, but that's where the difference stops. They all have the same eyes, droopy nose, and almost the same hairstyle. And again, every clothing article is so boring. Tank top, t-shirt, shirt, tube top, string tops, and not a single print to be found on one of them. Heck, there's not even two colors on the same article of clothing.
Sweetie, you need to express yourself. Live a little. Work it, honey.
Ultimately, the art is bad, and like I've stated before, I don't care why. I don't care what skill they originally had, acquired later, how much they had on their hands, what tools were at their disposal, or anything like that. If the end product the consumer gets is looking like ass, I'm gonna say it looks like ass. And here it, for 90% of the comic's lifespan, looks like ass. Lewis makes great strides in improving it, but even what he ends up with is subpar at best. I'd have loved to see a comic remade from the ground up by Chad, but even then, I think I prefer even more to see him do a comic that wasn't this poorly written.
I mean, no matter how much you polish a turd, it's still gonna be a turd.
The protagonist is none other than Carter Granholm, I can't believe I'm saying this, the first self-insert of Louis Lohawk. Carter is a comic book nerd and a superhero. Yep, that's it. It's clear to me that Lewis just looked at what a superhero typically was and then mixed that with what he was as a person. A superhero is typically protective and struggles with keeping his superhero identity hidden when he's in civilian clothing, and it seems that's all Lewis bothered putting into Carter. Carter has the role of a superhero civilian and nothing else. He has no personality other than his comic book interest. So much so that everything you see with Carter likes or dislikes originates or mirrors from different comic books.
You have the swayiness from Bruce Wayne, the bumbling awkwardness from Peter Parker, and the do-gooder attitude from Clark Kent, and there's probably a lot more from other comics I'm not familiar with.
Carter has no personality of his own to speak of. There's nothing that sets him apart from his peers once you strip away his superpowers.
I'm gonna need the suit back.
But I'm nothing without this suit.
If you're nothing without this suit, then you shouldn't have it.
Carter as a person is bland, boring, uninspired, one-dimensional, and it shows the immaturity of the writer when he's clearly projecting himself onto his character, and this was all he could come up with. It screams that Lewis hadn't found himself and what made him him when he made Carter. And if you think I'm going hard on the self-insert thing, let me reiterate that when you have a character be in the same situation that you've been, and you're mirroring all the character's ideals and thoughts, a similar appearance, and you're right there in the description agreeing with the character, I think it's pretty cut and dry that this is you inserting yourself in very large portions into this comic. It's downright impressive to have a character being a mishmash of so many characters, most of which are fictional and exaggerated, and you still end up with someone who's this boring and bland.
And let's not forget, this is Lewis's second attempt on including himself in his own comic.
Linkara, the character, not that character, a different character, was first introduced in the Angel Armor book series written by, you guessed it, Louis Lohawk. If you're interested in reading these books, let me read up a book summary here from Amazon. Louis Williamson is not like most other teenagers. He's an eccentric Christian optimist. However, that's not what makes him special. What makes him special is that on a world full of magic, shouldn't it be in a world full of magic? Heroes and evil, Louis is a prophesized hero called the Linkara, and is destined to defeat a great darkness, fight off an enemy of dark knights, and end a 300-year war by using an armor that was imbued by angels. How does Louis react to the news? Only one word sums it up. Groovy.
Moving quickly along.
Anyway, Linkara, the alter ego of Louis, get it? Because it's pronounced the same as Louis, but spelled differently. So it's totally not Louis, but it is. Shows up and has a long introductory speech ripped straight from V for Vendetta, but with all the V words being replaced with L words. And no, it doesn't make sense in the context either, considering V does it because he's straight up fucking around with Eevee, and here Linkara is doing it because comic book reference, I guess. And yep, he's a comic book nerd too. Really, it's just Carter again, but apparently younger, question mark. Cause it sure doesn't come through the comics writing that he's younger. He acts exactly like Louis, so much so that it's like copy-pasting a different character and just putting them in a blue shirt instead of a red. I mean, you read comics, Louis. Look at Spider-Man compared to Captain America. One is a goofy asshole, the other is Captain America. There you have the age difference. It's like you have a reference to how to show different age groups. I just don't get how you can make the same character twice, put them together, and not see how similar they are. I also can't understand just how exactly Linkara fits in this universe, cause he was, from the sound of it, from a different world with ancient magic, prophecies and dragons. And now he's in what looks like a real world setting. I suppose I could find the answers by actually reading the books, but
I would literally rather saw my own dick off.
If you think I'm being harsh on Carter/Lightbringer, why don't I read the description of him in the cast page of the webpage so you can see, even with the creator's own words, how nothing a character this is. Carter's parents, devout pacifists, always try to instill their beliefs on their young son, trying to keep him away from reading or viewing anything that would encourage violence as a solution to any of life's problems. Carter continued to read comic books in secret even after his parents were murdered by a gang member mocking them. Carter devoted himself to following the pacifist views of his parents, until the harsh conditions of Pharaoh City finally drove him to realize that Pharaoh City would never be saved unless he took action. Born with unusual powers to manipulate light, and thanks to sewing lessons from his home economic classes taken in high school, Carter designed his Lightbringer outfit, and nuts, that should probably be now, fights to make Pharaoh City a better place to live. Not a single word, not one, is used to describe Carter or Lightbringer as a character. I mean, shit, over half of this is spent on talking about his parents more than him.
I mean, I've attached more traits to his personality than Lewis even did.
Next up we got... What the fuck was her name again? Oh, Hannah Mentz. Sure, why not? Hannah, to my surprise, actually has some personality. She's energetic and quite the tomboy, and also knows how to take care of herself. She's also a big superhero fan, which I kinda suppose won't surprise a lot of people, cause it's obvious she's just supposed to be Carter's perfect girlfriend. This is the opposite sex of the same issue we saw in Faithful Hearts. It's, yo, I want that, so I'ma make it for me. I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but I honestly think if you ask Lewis, he'd tell you that this is how his perfect girlfriend looked when he was younger, and fuck it. I think we all had the ideal partner in our head. Lewis just put it down on paper. Not exactly gonna bash him on that, it's fine, it's part of being a teenager where hormones run wild. Not exactly the best character in the world, but it sure leaps and bounds over Lewis.
No, Lewis. No, the other one. No, not that Lewis. The other one. The one with the armor. The one in all white. The superhero. The one who can fly. The one who shoots stuff out of it. No, the other.
We also got Police Chief Eddie Crane, and let me just... There we go. Seriously, I made some, I find, fair jabs at Lightbringer being an amalgamation of different superheroes, but that's got nothing on Commissioner Police Chief Eddie Crane here, cause this is just Gordon. And it's not just cause it's the cop that helps the superhero, but, like, the dude, of course, has to wear a trench coat. He has to have that rugged look. He has to talk with Lightbringer on top of a building, summoning him with a fucking Lightbringer light beacon, where Lightbringer will sometimes just vanish when they're having a discussion, and of course, he has to question Lightbringer's means and approach, but ultimately agree with it. Seriously, if you read this comic and don't see the parallel, then I don't know, I can't help you. I mean, you could probably get that checked. I don't know, something's definitely wrong here. Also, his last name is Crane, which is super close to Kane, as in Betty Kane, which was the first Batgirl introduced in 1961, but then in 1967 got replaced with Barbara Gordon, Commissioner Gordon's daughter.
Yeah, I know my Batman's one of it. Okay, and it's not entirely true. I actually just wiki stuff and then I say it with authority to appear smarter than I actually am.
There is one more character I want to touch on, most of all because she's so freaking stupid it's ridiculous. So there's this girl who calls herself Code Poet, and already here this is a stupid fucking issue. As if it wasn't obvious from her name, she's a hacker that's working for the FBI, but whatever. You know what's probably a good idea when you are a hacker, especially when you're a hacker working for the government, probably dealing with digital infiltration of various big gang members' computers and whatnot? To have a goddamn separation between you and your online alias. If everyone and their mother knows your online alias, then what the goddamn fuck is the point with having an online alias? Lewis, you more than anyone should know that sometimes you want an online alias that cannot be linked to you. Which slides us nice and easy into another reason why I want to talk about Code Poet.
When I first came up with her, the idea was, in a nutshell, that she was an actress who was raped on stage in front of thousands of people who didn't realize she was being raped.
Bitch! What the fuck?
Just fucking ew. I'm not gonna degrade any scores or anything on the characters, as this isn't part of the actual comic, But god damn does this paint a bad picture about a guy who so vehemently went against rape in comics that he made a long big speech about it, one I ended up using in my Jack reviews.
The beauty of morals online is that you can have 2 of them as long as you use a stage name of some sort.
As for the villains, I was originally gonna compare them to Saturday morning cartoon villains, but I kinda think that does a disservice to those cartoon villains. And I'm not saying that in an attempt for an epic diss rap battle rice scumbag, but because it helps highlighting why these villains are garbage while other cartoon villains are good. Almost all of the greater comic book villains I feel have motivations that helps explain why they do what they do. Especially Batman's villains are famously known for having empathetic villains that sometimes skirt so close to the line that you sometimes may mistake Batman as the villain and not, say, Mr. Freeze. Obviously, you also sometimes have the villains who just wanna be evil for the sake of being evil, like Heron's husbando, Dio.
Was I, Dio?
But they work because of how cartoony and sometimes silly they are. When looking at this and you look at the villains from Lightbringer, and especially when you know how big a comic book fan Lewis is, it's kinda impressive how bad he missed the mark. One and only one villain in the entire thing is empathetic in the least, but his means are so drastic and insane that they in no way justify the end. You get characters like Jack the Ripper, yes, really, and Serpent.
Because poor literacy is cool.
Who are obviously only there to be goons that are quickly beaten and never talked about again. Then you got villains like the Darkbringer, who is the super typical antithesis of the main hero, only he's as one-dimensional as Carter and Lightbringer, so it's really only brought down to this guy's evil, cause Lightbringer is good. There's no clashes of ideals, personalities, motivations, stuff you can relate to. It's all just, hey yo, this guy's evil and this guy's good and they do the fight, yeah, strong style. And lastly, of the villains worth speaking about, the Smiling Man, and no, it's not cause a lot of people when we streamed this comic said that this was me. No, it's because this is the first and only time I can think of that Lewis actually managed to set up a mysterious character. One whose motivations seemed foggy rather than just evil, one who was shrouded in mystery that I was actually keen on finding out more about him. The only problem is, however, that if I do want to find out more about this guy, I have to read a completely different comic called The Crossover Lord. The Crossover Lord. Whatever. It's a different comic made by 8 characters, one of which is of course Lewis.
This is why I have such a hard time getting into Western comics. All of this, read this to understand that, and I'm just sitting here going, how about you just tell me a cohesive story? How about that?
The writing is a 4. This isn't good, but it's made with heart and endearment. There's no giant plot holes, but there's terrible retconning. It's a comic made by one with a lot of heart, but incredibly little knowledge. The art is a 5. It's cool and generally nice to see Lewis go from his dog shit art to kinda sorta passable art, and of course it really gets a kick up when the 2 other artists take over, but even then it's only alright. The characters are a 2. Terrible, terrible, terrible. These characters are trash with as much personality as stale bread. The only thing setting them apart are their looks, powers and jobs, and that shouldn't be the case when making characters. The final verdict for the Lightbringer webcomic and the reading experience is a 3. It's another one of those comics that has the heart in the right place but doesn't know what to do with it. It's an amateur work, and again, had it not been for Lewis's other online profession, I don't think this comic would have garnered any attention. I sure as hell don't think it deserves it.
The Lightbringer is a great example that it is so much harder to build something up than it is to tear it all down. Lewis, in my opinion, is a great critic, but he is not a great writer. And that's my review. I know some of you probably wanted me to talk about all of the drama that was mentioned in the Medica video. about his search histories and his favorites and all that stuff, about the Iron List drama, and you know what? You guys deal with that. That's on you. I review comics. I keep saying it. And that's what the stream should have been in the first place. It should be about the comic and not about Lewis. So, yeah. Thank you.
Kara is a freak. You didn't even mention all of the drama he has been involved with.
Because I don't have to. You're right. Once we start pointing that gun outwards, it's so easy to take shots at something. No matter who you are online, no matter how big of a following you have, in the end you're still just a person. And a person is typically flawed and has some things they don't want to show the rest of the world.
He has the audacity to tell other people their work isn't good, and he made this crap.
Yeah, several years ago. And really, that's what we as creators do. That's what we as people do. We evolve, we improve, we learn from our mistakes. Mistakes that we sometimes find ourselves, and sometimes it's pointed out to us by others. And in the end, what really matters is whether or not we're willing to take that gun that we so often flaunt around and point outwards, and every now and then point it towards ourselves.
I will never stop being here.
And I don't want you to go away. I will need someone out there who can point out my mistakes when I don't see them myself. Someone who can put me on the right path when I stray from it. But you must also understand that sometimes I will choose to ignore your directions, because inside I know where I'm going.
You will be lost without me.
I will, yeah. But I can't let you steer me completely in the direction that you want. That way my show won't be the webcomic relief that I created. It will be something that you created. And I as a person, I won't be me that I created. I will be what you created.
Will you do?
Isn't it obvious? There's only really one thing that I can do. Blow the lid of my imagination.
We are creators. We are artists. We are performers. We are crafters. We are musicians. We are many. Being a creator is not easy. Whether we do it for fun, for fame, or for money, we do it because we at some point within ourselves care for it. We burn for it. We do it because it drives us, because it defines us, because it helps us find out who we are and what we are not. We do it for ourselves, and we do it for others, and sometimes we find out what we're doing isn't enough.
Play dead, roll over, stinking like sex in a Range Rover.
We improve, we evolve, we practice, we train, we put our all into it, and sometimes we come out on the other side victorious. And other times, we don't.
Blink twice, baby, think twice. And I look you in the eye. You know this is the last time I'm gonna put you back together.
Sometimes we feel like we hit a wall and we cannot improve. We see it all come crumbling down around us. We see everything we made and ask ourselves whether it was all worth it. And sometimes it's scary. Sometimes we move into areas we didn't feel comfortable with. We point the gun towards ourselves and look for our own shortcomings and how to improve on them. We cry, we yell, we scream, and we swear never to do it again. But deep inside, if we truly care for it, we cannot let it go. So we equip ourselves with the tools of our trade. We arm ourselves with the weapons we are familiar with. It's not easy, but nothing worth doing is. So we tear it all down and we build it back up, better, stronger. We learn, we adapt, we change. We take that blood, sweat and tears, we turn it into ink and we create with it. That's what it means to be a creator. That's what it means to be us. And that's it. That's this season of the webcomic relief. Oh boy, okay. Going completely off script here, because I wanted all this to come straight from the heart. So, pardon me if I stumble over my words or anything. All my Patreons and everyone on the Webcomic Relief Discord already knows the reason why this video has taken so long. But to all of you who don't necessarily follow me in these places, there's been a bunch of stuff going on. You can check on the Discord if you're really interested, but yeah, it's just not been an easy couple of months for me. But let that be one thing entirely on its own. Like, it is what it is, and let's move on. So yeah, just thank you guys so much. Like, if you've seriously been sticking with this throughout this entire season, thank you so much. I can't thank you enough. And thank you to all who has ever pledged any money to the Patreon. I'm like blown away by your generosity. I'm really thankful for it. It has changed my life completely, more than you guys could ever know. Thank you to everyone who has been guest starring in this season of the Webcomic Relief. I showed a bunch of them earlier. There's also my good friend Simon. I couldn't fit him in there, but yeah, I just want to thank him. And of course, also a massive, huge shout out to everyone who decided to join me in my little ode to creators here at the end. It was really cool that so many people signed up for it. Unfortunately, some people weren't too fond of showing their faces online, and I can 100% understand that. So there's absolutely no hard feelings there. We made it in the end. And actually, when working on it, I found out that, holy shit, how the hell do I squeeze all of this into this one song? I'm not gonna go on too long, but the ending for this particular season and what it's about, like, I tried my best to make some subtle things here and there, make it up like something that is not immediately apparent, like what the message is, but a lot of it has hit very close to home, and I hope that it can help some of you people who are creators, and just that some of what was said rings true for you. And yeah, I think I've talked long enough now for the credits to have rolled properly up behind me. So with that, there's not much more to say other than thank you so much. Stick around to hear about the Patreons who has backed up this episode, and by all means join the Webcomic Relief Discord, join the Webcomic Relief Patreon, and don't forget that you can get some cool merch in the TeePublic merch store. All the links for these will be in the description, and I will see you guys in season 5 of the Webcomic Relief. Nicholas Knudson. Nicholas wants me to push the YouTube channel called FishStickOnAStick. It's a channel that does roast reviews and readings of Creepypasta, so it's basically what you'd get if you mixed Nightmine with the webcomic relief. So check it out. Amocin. Amocin is working on a comic called Druids, which is a mature themed fantasy comic in the world of Warcraft. If you are interested in a more mature story from that world, and done by someone who actually knows how to write, check it out. Hitori the artist. Hitori needs money for his dad's medical bills. If there's any way you can help Hitori, he would greatly appreciate it. You can both donate, pledge to his Patreon, or commission him and get some sick art for it. I'm a Moron. Moron wants me to push his comic Doom Ones, which is a really meta chosen one story with a twist. Rojaru. Rojaru wants me to push his friend Zeevkesly, who is currently living in Japan but is raising money to move to America. They sell enamel pins, stickers of their designs, and has or will open commissions for tattoos or just normal commissions. The link is in the description. The Bonsai. Bonsai is working on a fantastic comic that I've had the pleasure of sitting down with him and help with on the sidelines. Seeing how thoroughly this guy worked with this comic is an absolute treat, and I can't wait till you guys finally get to see it. Follow Bonsai on his social medias to keep track of when his comic drops. Shane Asher. Shane has moved pretty far in the Hardwood original character tournament that he's using as a preview for his webcomic SOS, Soldiers of Seraria. Please go check it out and cheer him on so our boy can go as far as possible. And I also want to give a huge shout out to Henry Volt, Lorayo-kun, Sebastian Vanborg, Kathy Catlin, Neo, Alex J, Jordan Burke, Stacy Pitt, KH Vafiel, Kawai Lee, Shiv, and Drika of Adrian. And also a super huge thank you to all the lovely people that you see here. If you want to support the show, change my life and make it so I can live off of YouTube and entertaining people, please go to my Patreon. Here you can donate anything you want every month and you will get a ton of awesome rewards for it. Just go to www.patreon.com/Riser with 2 eyes. There will be a link in the description. You can also go to TeePublic and get your hands on some of the new webcomic relief merch. There's also a link for that in the description. And if you don't want to support the show financially, at least think about liking the video, subscribing to the channel, or sharing your favorite webcomic relief episode with your friends. I'll see you guys at the next webcomic relief. Take care.